Welcome! Today, we're diving into a really compelling message about spiritual vigilance, especially for what the author sees as some pretty turbulent times. Our guide for this journey is going to be some powerful excerpts from the book The Watchman's Call, written by Vincent. Right at the beginning, the author gives us a little context that I think is really helpful. He explains that this book actually started as a series of his sermons. They've been adapted and kind of smoothed out into book form to make it a clear read. Knowing this really helps you understand that passionate, direct, almost spoken word style you feel throughout the whole thing. So, to really get to the heart of this message, we're going to walk through it step by step, just like the author does. We'll start with this foundational idea of a restored watch. Then we'll figure out, okay, who is this watchman? After that, we'll look at the author's diagnosis of what he calls a nation adrift, dig into the specific duties he outlines, and wrap it all up by looking at some pretty striking prophecies and warnings. So let's jump right in. Our journey begins with the absolute cornerstone of the book. The author frames his entire argument around what he describes as this moment of divine communication, a deep, profound feeling that a vital, maybe even lost spiritual practice is being brought back. Everything kicks off with this one simple but powerful phrase the author says he heard directly from God. I'm restoring the watch of the Lord. This isn't just a small tweak or a suggestion for improvement. For the author, this is a divine announcement. It's the catalyst for the entire book, this idea that God is actively restoring a powerful spiritual practice that may have been forgotten over time. Okay, so if this watch of the Lord is being restored, that begs the question, right? Who exactly is the watchman? Well, the author has a very specific answer, and he takes great care to show how this role is different from other spiritual jobs you might be more familiar with. According to the author, a watchman is way more than just someone who prays a lot. The text really emphasizes that they are seers, people who are anointed to see what's happening on a spiritual level. It's a role that involves getting exact details about things and then, crucially, having the courage and spiritual authority to speak that truth, even if it's uncomfortable or challenges the way things are, even inside the church itself. This here really breaks it down perfectly. The author makes this crystal clear distinction. On the one hand, he says a watchman is not just a prayer warrior, not someone who's just bound by religious tradition, and definitely not someone worried about being popular or politically correct. But on the other hand, the role is meant to be a seer and a watcher, someone who releases exact details and isn't afraid to speak those uncomfortable truths. This contrast is absolutely central to understanding his entire message. So now that we have a clear picture of who the watchman is, the book pivots to why this role is so critical right now. This is where the author lays out his assessment of the problems he sees plaguing both the church and the United States as a whole. And the author doesn't hold back. He lays out a list of some really serious concerns. He believes the church has become spiritually asleep and that core New Testament teachings are sorely missing today. He also has some sharp criticism for what he calls misinformation coming from some television ministers. But it's not just about the church. He also points to forces that are actively trying to divide the nation. And he argues the church has failed in its mission to care for the poor, the homeless, and widows, a job he believes it has sort of handed off to the government. To really illustrate his point about national division, the author includes this direct statement. He points to the beginning of the Obama presidency as the specific time when, in his view, an enemy force started to really sow division. And he's very clear in stating that he doesn't believe this is about race, but that it's a much deeper, spiritual battle for, as he puts it, the soul of our nation. So, given this pretty stark diagnosis of the problem, what's the solution? What's the response? Well, this brings us to the next part of the book, which lays out the specific duties and biblical responsibilities for anyone who feels they're being called to be a watchman. The author pulls straight from the Gospels to boil down what he sees as Jesus's 4 most important commands for the last days. And they are, do not be deceived, do not be alarmed, stand firm, and finally, keep watch. Now, while all 4 are obviously super important, the author argues that last one, keep watch, has a special, almost overriding significance. And why is it so significant? Well, it comes down to this single number, 11. The author points out that in these key Bible passages about the end times, the command to watch shows up 11 times. That's way more than any of the other instructions. For him, this isn't just a coincidence. It's a form of divine emphasis. It makes watching the single most critical duty for believers. But here's a really interesting point. A watchman's revelation, what they see, isn't meant to just stay with them. The author says the key to making it effective is what he calls agreement in prayer. He believes a watchman's spiritual insight doesn't have real power until they can find at least one other person to agree with them in prayer. He cites the Bible, saying this agreement is what unlocks spiritual authority and turns an observation into real, tangible action. If you'd like to learn more about this principle and the author's work, you can visit revivalwavesofgloryministries.com. All right, the final part, our explainer, gets into the most specific and, honestly, forward-looking claims in the entire text. This is where the author shifts from talking about principles to giving direct prophecies and warnings about what he sees coming in the future. The book lays out several very distinct prophecies. The author states that he was told gas prices would eventually return to $2.09 and that Obamacare is destined to fall apart completely. He also puts forward the claim that President Obama's birth certificate was forged. And looking even further ahead, he warns that a nationwide switch to electronic voting will basically become a form of legalized illegal voting. And ultimately, he predicts that America will sign its rights and sovereignty over to a union of nations, an event he interprets as a major sign of the end times. So who is the person behind this message? In the About the Author section, Bill Vincent is identified as leading a prophetic ministry called Revival Waves of Glory Ministries. For anyone who wants to explore his work in more detail, the book provides a direct link to his ministry's website, which is revivalwavesofgloryministries.com. And that brings us to the end of our look into the core message of the Watchman's Call. The author makes a pretty urgent case, right? He defines this unique spiritual role as a response to what he sees as a deep national crisis. The ideas he presents really leave us with a big question to think about. In our complex world today, what role does this kind of spiritual vigilance, the role of the watchman, play within our faith communities? It's definitely something to ponder. Thank you for listening to the Deep Dive podcast.